Adolfo Constanzo, the leader of a drug-smuggling voodoo cult responsible for the ritualistic murders of 15 people in northern Mexico.
U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agencies investigating the discovery of 12 mutilated bodies in a mass grave at a ranch south of the border learned of the ringleader from the 4 men arrested in the killings.
On the night of March 13, 1989, a 21-year-old college student named Mark Killroy walked across the border into Matamoros, Mexico, with 3 of his closest friends. They were there for spring break and it was just one night out. And somewhere around midnight, Mark got separated from the group. His friends figured he had just caught a ride back to the hotel and they went to sleep without checking up on Mark, and nobody ever seen him since then. When investigators finally uncovered what happened to him, they did not just find a killer, they found a ritual site, a cauldron filled with human remains, 15 bodies buried in the dirt of a remote ranch, and at the center of all of it, a single man who had convinced an entire drug cartel that he could not be touched, that he had power over life and death, that the spirit inside his cauldron protected them all, and his name was Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo was born in Miami to a Cuban immigrant mother. On the surface, nothing about his early life screamed dangerous, but inside that home, his mother practiced a form of Palo Mayombe. Now that is an African tribe's spiritual tradition, and most people who follow it live completely ordinary lives. But his mother's version of it was completely different, darker, centered on blood and animal sacrifice, and they believed that the dead could be called on to do the will of the living. Adolfo grew up watching rituals most children never see, and instead of being frightened by them, he was very fascinated by it. As a teenager, he started apprenticing under a Haitian priest in Miami. He studied, he practiced, and he got very good at it with time. But more than the rituals, he was developing something else, a gift for reading people, for sensing what they were afraid of and what they really wanted, what gap inside them needed filling. He was learning how to make people believe. In his early 20s, he moved to Mexico City, and that is where everything changed. Mexico City in the mid-1980s was flooded with cartel money and cartel fear. Drug traffickers were getting rich and getting killed in almost equal measure. The violence was constant and unpredictable. Adolfo showed up and offered something those men desperately wanted. It was protection, not the kind that came from guns or bribes. It was spiritual protection. He told them that he could perform rituals that would shield their operation, destroy their enemies, and keep the law enforcement at bay. His early clients watched things go right. Shipment moved, rivals stumbled, the police stayed away from them, but the big question was, is it really Adolfo? And the answer was, of course not. But in that environment, coincidence looks a lot like proof. Word spread through the cartels and they started talking about, there's a guy who can solve our problems and make us rich and safe. Everyone started believing on him completely, and Adolfo, who understood exactly what was happening, leaned into it completely. Every person who gains that kind of influence builds a circle around themselves. Adolfo was no different, but the people he pulled up in might surprise you. There were low-level criminals, but there was also a man named Martin Quintana Rodriguez who became one of his most devoted followers, and there was Sarah Eldred. Sarah was a college student at a university in Matamoros. She was an honors student on the athletic program, smart, social by every outward measures, a person headed somewhere good, and Adolfo made her his second in command. His followers called her La Madrina, the godmother. That question of how is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is the same question people ask about every cult. How does a rational person end up there? Adolfo never opened with darkness, he opened with certainty, with the sense that he could see things other people could not. That he had chosen you specifically because you were capable of understanding what most people were too small to grasp. By the time the rituals escalated, by the time the line between spiritual practice and something far worse started to blur, the people around him had already reorganized their entire sense of reality around him. Walking away at that point does not just mean leaving a group, it means admitting that everything you believed for the past year or two was a lie, and most people cannot do that, so they choose to stay, and the rituals escalated. Adolfo told his followers that his Naganga, the ritual cauldron at the center of their practice, needed to be fed animals' blood first. Then he told them human remains made it stronger, that a human brain gave the spirit inside it intelligence and power. And everyone was so blinded by Adolfo's lie that they believed him without questioning a single thing. In 1987, Adolfo made his most significant connection yet. He linked up with the Hernandez family, a drug trafficking clan operating out of Matamoros right on the Texas border. These were not small-time people. They ran a serious smuggling operation with real infrastructure, real product, and real violence backing it up. Adolfo walked in and made them a page. He was the reason their competitors kept falling. His protection was what kept their product moving and their names off arrest warrants. They used to pay him, follow his rituals, and they would be untouchable. They bought it completely. They gave him access, resources, and something more dangerous than either of those things. They gave him men who would follow his orders without question. The killings that followed were not impulsive. Adolfo selected victims deliberately. He wanted people he considered powerful, fighters, rivals. He believed the stronger the person, the stronger the ritual. The bodies went to a ranch outside Matamoros, Rancho Santa Lina, a remote property with enough land to bury secrets. Investigators would later connect Adolfo and his group to at least 23 confirmed murders, possibly more. The victims were not just killed, they were ritually mutilated, organs removed, remains placed inside the cauldron. For nearly 2 years this went on, and the Hernandez operation kept running, kept moving product, kept believing that Adolfo's ritual were the reason they are now safe till now. Then came the night Mark Killroy walked across that border, that student we talked about in the starting of the video. Mark was not chosen for any particular reason. He was not targeted because who he was. He was simply in the wrong place on the wrong night, walking past the wrong people. Members of the Hernandez operation grabbed him off the street. He was taken to Rancho Santa Elena and he was killed as part of a ritual. His friends spent the next morning assuming he had just gone back to the hotel without them, and it took hours before they realized he was actually missing. And here is where the story turns. When a young American college student goes missing on the Mexican border, it creates a very specific kind of pressures. Mark's family was not quite about it. His uncle had political connection. The story went national fast.
Among the bodies, that of Mark Killroy, a University of Texas student kidnapped during spring break in Matamoros last month.
American federal agent got involved and pressure came down hard on Mexican law enforcement to find answers. For years, nothing came to the thing and everything was going down, but then in April, at a routine checkpoint outside Matamoros, a truck blew straight through without stopping. The driver had clearly been told those checkpoints were not a problem, that the operation was protected, but the officers did not move. They stopped the truck, they detained the driver, and under questioning, he started talking, and what he described led investigators directly to Rancho Santa Elena.
And Mexican law enforcement agencies investigating the discovery of 12 mutilated bodies in a mass grave at a ranch south of the border learned of the ringleader from the 4 men arrested in the killings.
Mexican federal officials arrived at the ranch in April 1989. They found 15 bodies buried in the dirt. They found a shed. Inside was the Naganga, the cauldron. It held blood, animal remains, and human body parts. Human brains, and that where officers found Mark Killroy's remains were identified on that property. Investigators who processed that scene said it was unlike anything they had never worked, not because of the violence alone, but because of how organized it was, how deliberate it was. This was not a crime of rage or impulse. This was a system that had been running for years. And they arrested several members of the Hernandez family, were taken into custody. Followers of Adolfo were picked up one by one, but Adolfo himself was not there. He had been tipped off. By the time officers hit the ranch, Adolfo was already in Mexico City, holed up in an apartment with a small group of his most loyal followers, including Sarah Eldred. His face was on every news broadcast in the country. He was one of the most wanted men in Mexico, and yet in that apartment with nowhere left to go, the group did not fall apart, and even those moments they stayed. In the followers' mind that everything leader told them was true, and that they are being persecuted, that they have to stay together, and it was lasted less than a month. On May 16, 1989, a neighbor in the building called police about a disturbance coming from the apartment. Officer responded expecting a noise complaint, but someone inside opened fire, and that was the apartment where Adolfo and his followers were hidden. During the gunfight, Adolfo made one final decision. He was not going to be arrested. He was not going to stand trial. He turned to a follower named Alvaro de Leon Valdez and gave him a direct order to shoot him and shoot Martin. And so Valdez followed his master's order and he did exactly what Adolfo asked him to do. Adolfo Constanzo died on the floor of that apartment. He was 26 years old.
Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, the leader of a drug smuggling voodoo cult responsible for the ritualistic murders of 15 people in northern Mexico, was shot dead on his own order by one of his followers. Mexico City police rushed this building where they found Constanzo and another gang member shot dead. Constanzo's girlfriend, Sarah Aldret Villarreal, was arrested in the raid and denied involvement in the cult's ritualistic slayings.
Sarah Aldret and the remaining followers were taken into custody at the scene. In the court trial, Sarah Aldrete was convicted and sentenced to 62 years in prison. The Hernandez brother and the other member of the operation received lengthy sentences as well. The cauldron was seized as evidence. Officers who handled it said the experience stayed with them for a long time afterward. Law enforcement on both sides of the border studied this case for years. It was the first documented instance in North America of an active drug trafficking operation running alongside an organized murder cult. It changed how investigators thought about cartel crime and what they were willing to consider when bodies started showing up with no clear motive. And in all of that, an innocent man was killed. Mark Killroy had 2 years of pre-med left. He wanted to be a doctor. He was killed because he happened to walk past the wrong car on the wrong street in a town he had been to before without any trouble. And that is where the story ends. Thanks for watching.